And for me, I don't believe in the Holy Ghost. I don't believe in that type of thing. I feel like it's gut instinct. I feel like it's your own common sense and your own intuition in talking to somebody else and noticing something or making a decision or having a feeling about what you might need to do. I don't think there's the Holy Ghost tapping on my shoulder saying, you know, you should do this, you should do that. I hated church. I couldn't wait to get home. Everybody was very gossipy and catty, and I mean, we're
Mm.
cool, I thought.
Yeah. Do you feel like the concept of the Holy Ghost being taught to you that way made you sort of disconnect from your own intuition?
In a way, yeah, but I was a funny kid because you couldn't pull the wool over my eyes. I guess I had a great mistrust in people in the church to begin with. So then everything about the church, I didn't believe what anybody said.
Is there anything that you can pinpoint that fostered that feeling of mistrust in the church?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Growing up in New England, which is the mission field, um, I remember at the actual church house being about 4 years old. I'll never forget it. And I remember one of the guys that I knew passed the sacrament. That's all I really knew about him. I saw him at church. And I was in back of the church. My mom had left the area and I was by myself. And the next thing I knew, I was pinned up against. I remember the feeling of the brick on the building, and I remember it was red.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being shocked, and it happened so fast. I didn't even knew what hit me. I didn't even know what was happening. But I knew I didn't feel good about it. I was scared to death. In fact, I was so scared that I thought I had done something wrong as a 4-year-old that I didn't tell my mother or father. So
Wow.
I started to think that church was a scary place to be. So I didn't feel like going in the building. When I'd see the building as we drove up, that's all I could think about. I started mistrusting a lot of things during that time, and it just escalated to my parents going, for example, to see some friends at church, them having like a teenage son. And I remember somehow ending up in his bedroom.
Mm.
I was lured into his bedroom and he said, let's play a game.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a game.
Mm-hmm.
And this is someone from church.
Right. Someone who you should have been able to trust.
And I didn't tell my parents again. And again, I felt shame. I felt like I had done something wrong. And
Yeah.
so and so everything about church and what everybody believed, for me, I identified it as, I guess a violent place.
Mm.
A violent, I know there's kind and good people in the church and not everyone does these things. But I found it curious that I kept running into it. It went from the church house to church, friend's son. Then it went to family. And that was the
Yeah.
worst part. That was the worst part of it all for me. That if I were to tell my mother specifically, it would break her heart. She wouldn't recover from it.
Mm.
And I know she'd believe me, but I know she'd never see the person married to him ever again.
I think so often as survivors, when we consider whether or not we're going to tell our story, we consider the experiences of everybody else except us first. We think, how's my mom going to react? How's my dad going to react? What are their relationships going to be like? We sort of project into the future and say, well, I'm going to disrupt the entire system and things are going to get broken. And sometimes it feels safer for things not to get broken. And so we absorb it and we hide it in order to keep the peace.
You're right. And I think I was quite depressed, but didn't know what depression was.
Right. Right.
And anxiety.
Yeah. Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome to the Midlife Revolution. I'm your host, Megan Connor. In my book, I Walked Through Fire to Get Here, I wrote that someone once told me religion was for people who are scared of hell, and spirituality is for people who've already been there. And then I wrote that my religion was part of my hell. And I know that I'm not the only one. I've had lots of people reach out to me over the years to tell me their stories of growing up in the LDS Church. And today we're going to hear the story of Lori Nansi, who grew up within the architecture of abuse that exists in the LDS Church. We're going to hear her story of how she evolved in her Mormon faith at odds with what was the best thing for her and at odds with being treated abusively and being used by the people in her life, even her own family members. Welcome, Lori.
Hi, Megan. I was getting confused. Oh my gosh.
It's okay.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for trusting me with your story. And thank you for being brave enough to talk about it, because I know how hard it is.
It is hard. It is scary because it's just floating around in your head for years.
Yeah.
It's just like in a safe. But there comes a time where the safe has to get opened.
And as we were just talking about, sometimes staying silent is harder than speaking up. And I think that's the right time to speak up.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I appreciate your channel, and you're someone that I trust to tell my story to. So,
Well, thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. I know that my subscribers, my channel members will treat your story with care, and that they'll be compassionate with you. My little corner of the internet is, for the most part, a very compassionate place. I know that my revolutionaries here will honor your story.
That's pretty awesome. And I appreciate that to all the revolutionaries. I said, I love that.
So where would you like to start?
Well, I grew up in New England, in the Boston area. I lived there, I don't know, until I was around 9, 10 years old, until we moved to the Wild West, to one of the Mormon kingdoms, to Idaho, southeast Idaho,
Yeah.
and Rigby, Idaho at that.
Oh,
So
wow.
we're talking about a good 16 miles from Rexburg, Idaho. And
Very rural.
oh yeah, really rural, little tiny schools, and tiny community. Everybody knew everybody, and I felt good moving there and leaving behind a lot of things that happen in New England, like a fresh start.
Mm-hmm.
The less people, the better. The less humans, the better for me.
Mm. Yeah.
We still went to Utah. We had a lot of family in Utah. So it wasn't like I was free from people that can control themselves in the church. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people that feel deprivation, and I kind of felt like being told no to everything, like the word of
Yeah.
wisdom and things like that, propel people forward and give them the urge to almost do the opposite. And
Right.
and I feel like I don't want to just corner men on this because, I'll just say humans will do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But in my particular case, it wasn't like I was free yet just because I was in Southeast Idaho, but it was better. But,
Yeah.
but going to Utah and seeing family, I always felt pressure, nervous, anxiety. I'd always get asked questions like, it wasn't, how are you? It's like, so how is church? Do you have a
Right.
calling? Do you have a calling? Do you have a job?
Yeah.
You started to pay your tithing?
Yeah.
Did you go do baptisms for the dead yet?
Mm-hmm.
it was like we're talking about hyper religiosity to the maximum, a good portion of the people. And it drove
Yeah.
me insane.
That's such a good point that we don't really focus on the individual or the individual's experience. All we care about in the church when we're in the church is where are they on the covenant path and are they doing the next thing that's expected of them? Because that kind of makes the rest of us feel safe about we're all in this together, you know?
Yeah, and I noticed that got to me and I didn't like it. And I would turn the conversation elsewhere or I would just walk away.
Yeah.
I wasn't very good at participating. If someone asked me to say a prayer or read a scripture and bear my testimony, that was a no-go. I'd either not show up at church and say I'm sick at home. I would do anything not to do it,
Mm-hmm.
including skipping seminary almost every day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I want to rewind just a little bit because, growing up in New England is very different from growing up in the church in what we call the Mormon corridor, the Idaho, Utah, Arizona, some of California, some of Texas. I did middle school and high school years in Connecticut, and so I know my experience in the church was very different from the Utah experience. But since you moved away at a young age, I'm just curious about your impressions about New England church versus Idaho church.
Well, I think that from what I recall, I felt like there weren't as many members back then. So you didn't, and also in that part of Boston, you didn't see a lot of church houses. And
Yeah.
so it was almost like everyone in the area went to one church and that was
Yeah.
it. You wouldn't see church houses on every corner. There was no temple there at that
Right.
time. I promise I'm not a dinosaur, but it sounds like it. There was no temple there. So it was a trip to Washington, D.C. for people. But it was just I think it was more of a close knit situation where people gathered more outside of church. Like church members were also friends. And there
Hmm.
was I felt like it was this almost like belonging to a club. I watched them all as they patted themselves on the back. And what I mean by
Mm.
that was if they weren't at church doing church things, they were having dinner with each other or a get together. So it was more close knit. And yeah, I noticed that. Um, and I felt like it was a little more scandalous, I guess you say, just from my experience as a kid, but also like weird things would happen in the church building.
Mm.
Like the bishop stood up to give the closing prayer of the dedication to the church house. They had done something to it. I don't remember what, but he stood up to say the prayer. And before he could say the prayer, he just fainted and dropped down and died right there and then.
Wow.
And I remember going, whoa, you
And
guys,
how old were you?
I was about 9 years old.
Wow.
And I remember
That,
thinking, yeah, this place is haunted. Bad things have happened to me
yeah.
here, and now people are dropping down like flies. You
Yeah.
know, it was spooky. I thought it was haunted.
Was it a designated LDS church building or had they repurposed it from something else?
I think it was designated. I think so. I think the church bought the land per
Yeah.
usual and built it, but I
Okay.
think they remodeled it or did
Yeah.
something where they needed to kind of, I don't remember the word, but it's like blessed it,
Renovation
like
yeah, they have to
like they
rededicate it.
rededicate it like they do with temples. Yeah, same
Right.
thing. But there was
Yeah.
no angel Moroni on the top of it or anything like that.
Right. Just a regular meeting house. So you had told us previously that your first abusive experience happened when you were 4 years old
Mm-hmm.
in the church building,
Mm-hmm.
which I find horrifying on so many different levels. First of all, just a 4-year old in a position where they get cornered in the church building, and then also a young man who is willing to do something like that in a church building. And was this somebody that you knew or you just had seen at church? You said he passed the sacrament.
I knew who passed the sacrament because the brother closest to me in age, he was about 16, 17 years older than me. And I remember every one of their faces. I can remember sitting in certain pews. I remember my brother, like, I don't know why they would motion to me to come sit over with them, and I would sit on their laps. And it was weird. I've never
Yeah.
seen anybody do that in any other church. And I remember his name. His parents were friends with my parents. And
Mm,
I remember that he was hard of hearing, that he was,
mm,
he happened to be deaf. So that
yeah.
stuck out to me.
Yeah.
Not that there's, I don't have anything that, it's just a small detail, because of me remembering the sounds, because
Yeah.
it was very particular. I remember in that same spot where it happened, not long after having family photos by someone at church that was a photographer. And I have
Mm,
those pictures, and every time I look at those pictures, I think about it. And
yeah.
I was in a lot of pain, physically, and nobody knew.
Yeah.
Nobody knew. And at that point, you're old enough where you're not really being examined or anything. You're not a baby wearing diapers or anything.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so yeah, it was really traumatic, and I felt like that super knit closeness. I think some people felt they could get away with anything. I can't even explain it. It was just a different feeling on the mission field. People were good friends, and everybody had more access to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you say the mission field, that's what the LDS people refer to as anywhere outside of the Mormon corridor, that Idaho, Utah, Arizona area. That's the mission field. And I remember being told that as well. And so what you're describing is really familiar to me because my parents only socialized with other LDS people when we lived in Connecticut. And so, holidays, birthdays, whatever, get togethers, once a month, potlucks, things like that. It was always with members of the LDS church. I don't think I ever saw them socialize with anyone who was not LDS other than the one couple who was like my dad's boss. And that was it. And so I'm very much understanding what you're saying. Like all of us young people, there weren't very many of us. And so we all knew each other and we all spent a lot of time together.
Yeah, and the elders were at our house almost every Sunday,
Wow.
and we knew them all, and most of them were from Utah and Idaho, as a matter of fact. I mean, that even became a problem. I guess I was around 10, and I remember we had the elders over, and there was one from Logan, Utah, and I remember there was a letter in the bathroom. And I was like, what's this? And it had my name on it because it was just like on the main floor. And it was a love letter to me
Mm.
from the elder that was sitting at the table having dinner with my family.
And
And
how old were you at this point?
I was around 10. We hadn't
Wow.
moved to Southeast Idaho yet, but I went back to the table and he announced to everybody that someday I was going to be his wife, that he loved me.
Wow.
And I remember everyone laughed at the table. And my aunt was visiting and she said, "Did you know she's only 10 years old?" And he said, "Oh no, I didn't. She looks older than that." Because maybe I was more developed and, a little bit taller. I don't know. But I had zero interest. But every time he'd come over, there was a love letter. And the next time it was his football ring he put on the letter.
I'm so curious to know how your parents responded to that.
my parents were they laughed it off, and my parents were very oblivious. My mom was so kind and loving. She didn't shove the church down anybody's throat. She was the type of woman that just kind of was a good human. And if you were curious why, maybe she would tell you a little bit about herself. So she was a little bit quiet, sweet. My dad was outspoken. He was a convert. And I hate to say this, because both of my parents have passed on. But respectfully, in my observing him until I was an adult, I wasn't quite sure that my dad was really on board, even though he went through the motions and did everything that he was supposed to do. There was just this feeling that you're not supposed to drink coffee. Still my dad drank coffee in the morning. It was like, I'm not giving up my coffee. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was kind of like he was that Bostonian and had a mind of his. But definitely, I think the big pivot there was my parents. There were some things going on in that house besides those letters and that ring. He would my parents would let the elders come over and watch football games on Sunday. And they'd go downstairs and watch football games. And, some of the nieces and nephews and I would go down there, and his companion, I don't know if he asked him to leave or what, but everybody was gone. And my very first kiss that I ever had was from a Mormon missionary. And it was
at 10 years old.
And it wasn't a peck on the cheek. It was not, it was, And I remember just standing there in shock because that hadn't happened in the previous episodes. It wasn't about that. His was trying to be more romantical, I guess. But I remember I ran up the stairs, and the first thing I did when I saw the sister missionaries was give them the letters, give them the class ring, and told them, because I felt closer to them. They were young women. They were from Utah and Idaho. And at that point, I was getting really nervous and scared about what was next. And I remember I never saw him again. He was transferred right away.
Rightfully so.
Parents didn't say a word. Didn't talk to them about it. Don't know if the sisters told anything. They never said a word.
I'm just thinking about, little 10-year-old Lori, and how I wish that your dad would have stood up at that table and thrown those missionaries out of your house and said, "Not my daughter. That's not appropriate."
Yeah, it kind of blew my mind. I think he laughed, and I think I think people almost kind of giggled, like they took it as a compliment, like, oh, he thinks she's cute, type of a thing, or maybe he's kidding, it's like a joke.
And when he said, "I thought she was older," well, what did he think, that you were 12? Because that's still not appropriate,
Even if I'm
for a
16.
12-year-old or a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old. It's like there were blurred lines there, and it sort of seems like it's a very Mormon thing to have some blurred lines about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And it seems like your dad sort of created this environment where the missionaries felt a little too comfortable in your home.
Because again, that's the vibe I got, that we're still drinking coffee. We're still doing a few things here and there. And I don't blame him. I don't blame him. I think, at some point he felt pressured to join. In fact, his thing, when the missionaries taught him, his big issue was believing in Joseph Smith. He couldn't get past that story.
Wow.
So I guess I was a little bit like him in the way that he was like, what? A boy went out into a grove and prayed and had a vision?
Yeah.
Okay, right.
So do you have any inkling of why he went along with it, even though he didn't seem to really believe it?
Oh, yeah. years and years and years and years later in Southeast Idaho, I had a conversation with a family member, and they told me something that had taken place before I was around, because I had been adopted when I was
Hmm.
7 months old. So a lot of stuff had happened, but long before um, something happened, and I feel like it was put forward to him that if things were going to continue, the dynamics of the family and everyone was going to stay together, then that was going to be the thing.
He was told by someone that he needed to get baptized, otherwise the family would be broken up,
Yeah,
essentially.
because
Um,
because he had, you know, committed a sin that was unforgivable. And I think he just, yeah. And people do. They, we're all we're all sinners, right? Little
right.
sins, big, every day. I
Yeah.
realized that, and when I heard that, I was like, why are you even telling me? It's none of my business.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
one thing, and how and why he joined. I just thought this person yet another gossiper. But I always said, now being this age and looking back, I really admire him. And not that he let the missionaries hang out and watch football and all that stuff. I think he was just a cool guy and didn't think some of those things would happen.
Yeah.
But the mission field, yeah, as we call it, is different than, as you say, the Mormon corridor. But I called it the Kingdom of Mormon, the Kingdom of Mormons. And,
Yeah.
Southeast Idaho is just a whole different animal.
It really is. It's very different from Utah, very different from Arizona. I know in my family growing up, we sort of made a distinction between Utah Mormons and California Mormons. And, they all sort of had their little way of, quote unquote, living the gospel. So is there anything else you want to say about the Boston area before we go to Idaho?
When I look back on my life in Boston, the only thing I can think about it that was good was going downtown and having a slice of pizza. That's it.
Yeah.
That it was a nightmare. The whole
Yeah.
like, for me the whole time there. And it was torture to have to go back to that building time and time.
Mm, yeah.
So I was afraid of everybody. And so yeah. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
never gone back to Massachusetts or to Boston since.
Wow.
Yep.
I can't imagine having to go back into the building over and over. Your recollection of having family pictures taken in the same spot, that must have been really traumatic for you. So I'm glad you were able to sort of escape to Rigby, but it sounds like it wasn't really an escape from the dynamics of what you were already experiencing. It was just a new location.
Yeah, new location. Um, didn't get any of that at the church house in Rigby. Mostly the people that had get-togethers with my parents, they would go to them, or the ones that came were I was old enough at one point. If there was a get-together, I would go get a plate of food and go up to my room.
Mm,
I didn't want to
yeah,
interact. I didn't want to have that opportunity for anybody. I didn't want to give them the opportunity to talk to me, touch me, have nothing to do with me. And I always
yeah,
locked the door behind me.
yeah. So, did you start to develop friendships at school, or did you stay pretty isolated as a child?
Looking back, I was very isolated. I had a few friends, and they were really good friends. And I felt like that was all I needed. I really, being popular in Southeast Idaho, being a cheerleader was a big deal. And I never had any desire to do that. I was kind of like, before I was the black sheep of the family, I was, in a way.
Yeah,
And at
yeah,
school, I just basically, I wasn't a good student. I was very preoccupied. I hadn't healed. I hadn't talked to anybody, hadn't gotten over all that stuff. So I was depressed, had a lot of anxiety. I had a hard time focusing on classes. I wasn't part of groups, you know. I isolated myself. It
Yeah.
happened. I could be alone by myself and be content, and I would be the happiest.
Yeah. It probably felt safer to you.
Oh yeah. The only time I really, I think, liked church had it, and it doesn't really have anything to do with actual church, was if I got invited to sing a solo. I liked singing. So, you know, wherever it was, school, you know, a school concert or, you know, musical or church, you know, I always liked to sing. You know, I sang at both of my parents' funerals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, your friends that you had, this little group of friends, were they also LDS, being in Rigby, Idaho? I'm guessing all LDS kids at your school probably. And how were they with the church? Were they all in believing people, or was there a little bit more nuance to them as well?
They were fun and they weren't like super judgy and they didn't have a chip on their shoulders or anything like that. I was comfortable around them. I think they knew I hadn't talked to them about my experiences, but they just kind of knew where I stood. It was
Mm,
noticeable, but they didn't stop socializing with me or inviting me to do things outside of church, outside of school. You know,
yeah,
I was more into talking with them about, you know, what we were going to wear, hair, makeup, you know, eating fast food,
yeah.
skipping seminary with me. So they did do that, you know.
So was seminary, was it release time from school, or was it before school, or how did that work?
It was during school. It was a
Yeah.
class during school. We walked across the school lawn and there was the church building right there. Go figure.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
we would go in there and I just thought I couldn't stand it. It was my class after lunch. I made sure it was. So then I could
Mm-hmm.
have a long lunch and skip it.
Smart.
I mean, I almost didn't graduate. That was the problem. And I felt pressure to graduate. My parents knew I was going to seminary. So basically, the seminary teacher said, "You've had so many absences here that I don't know how you're going to pass and go to the seminary graduation. The only thing I can say is if you'll want to sing, then we'll let you graduate." And I said, "Okay, sounds good to me."
So just another striking level of bribery of basically, if you perform this service for us, then we'll give you what is going to make you socially acceptable. So I'm just curious about, when you say graduate, you're talking about graduate from seminary, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, what I keep coming back to in all of these stories where people have these horrible things happen, what are the adults doing? I'm curious about, what's the seminary teacher doing when you're missing from class every day? Are they talking to your parents about it? Are they asking you about it? Or are they just staying silent and marking you absent?
So the thing is back then, you didn't have dinosaur age, no computers, you know, nothing like that. It was just the women in the office type thing. And there wasn't a notification through text that your child is late or absent. So I think it would have to be extreme for them to send a letter home or call. I don't remember ever having to address that with my parents. If they knew, they didn't say anything. But definitely an issue was the report cards going home. And then there was a conversation about that. And I used to try to reach the mailbox before them, and I would use black ink and I would change the letter F into the letter B. I was very good at that. And yeah.
Survival skills.
hmm And I think my dad looked at it and knew.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you got a report card from the seminary teacher that was separate from your school report card, or was it on the
Oh,
school report card?
I don't remember it being actually on the report card. And if
Okay.
it was always an A.
Hmm.
And I
So
wasn't
they
there.
So the seminary teacher basically just allowed you to skip class and didn't really report it to adults as far as you know, and also just went ahead and gave you an A and let you graduate instead of having a conversation with you about maybe why you weren't coming.
Oh yeah, there was no conversation about why I was coming, but if there would have been, I would have said, because I hate it here.
Yeah.
If you caught me on the right day, on the
Yeah.
wrong day, maybe.
Yeah. It makes me again just sad for you and for all of the kids in this system where these conversations just don't really get had because it's kind of uncomfortable, for a seminary teacher to go to the parents and say, hey, I know that your daughter's skipping. That opens up a conversation about, maybe it's too private. I don't want to pry, but why is your daughter not coming kind of thing. But me as a teacher, I mean, I would see that happen with my colleagues sometimes where they would just let a kid not show up and they would not say anything. And I always thought that that was really unethical as a teacher. If you know a kid is not coming to class, there's obviously something wrong and it obviously needs to be addressed. But I feel like in Mormonism, we are really used to just sweeping things under the rug.
Yeah. And my family was good at that too. And I mean, I will admit it really was a process through the years of being, and I think that because of that, that taught me that telling about things wasn't worthwhile, would just get swept under the carpet anyway. Nothing was going to change. Everything would be excused and wouldn't be talked about.
So that culture of secrecy and shame and silence really sunk in with you, and that's part of the reason why you didn't come forward and talk about your experiences.
It ran rampant in my home to the extent where now as an adult, I'm shocked at the secrets that I never knew about.
Yeah.
The secrets that I never knew about blows my mind. And there's I think even if these people were alive, I don't think I would confront it or ask a question about it. There's some things that I never did tell my mom and dad. I was protective of them, especially my mom. I didn't want to do anything to disturb her life.
Yeah.
And I knew that from a young age, that if something hurt my mom, there's no way I was going to tell her, even if it killed me inside.
Wow. That's such a huge burden for young Lori to carry, of protecting the adults from your experiences.
And it's a weird way to be wired, and to think like that. And I think the kids today, it's not so much that way. And I would hope not. I always tell them, to come to me and talk to me. And I try not to be too strict about certain things, but I am one of those parents, because of my experience, that I'm very aware. I always have my antennas up and are watching, personality changes and things like that. And I'm, as an adult, I still suffer from depression. When I was in Southeast Idaho and had depression, I was referred to a counselor, and I went, and come to find out, like, it was a specific church counselor for the church.
Yeah.
And he wanted to talk about scriptures, and he wanted to talk about the word of wisdom and things like that. He never addressed like psychology and why do you feel this way, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
I was like, dude, we are not talking again. I was just like, I'm not going to even do that again. He should have been somebody specializing in trauma,
100%.
Yeah.
Was it your uncle that was like a super, hyper religious person, high counselor person?
he was a nutcase. I mean, he really was. And I remember being a kid and thinking he was a nutcase. And I remember his mother coming over and she was a nutcase too. And what I mean by that is they used to like recite scripture and things like that when nobody asked for it. They would just stand up like, it was the weirdest thing ever. I just want to say, sit down and have a seat, okay? You're doing too much. I mean, it was just
So,
so weird to me. And
yeah.
as a matter of fact, he did suffer from hyper religiosity, and he was the family member that I needed to be the most nervous about.
Mm. And he was a high counselor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just curious about, I've never heard of this spontaneous reciting of scripture before. Was it a scripture that maybe was related to something that was going on in the conversation or something that was happening in the family, or was it just like
No,
spontaneous?
it was like a spontaneous combustion. It was just like, whoo. It was just like he was on fire, ready to go. Or then if it wasn't that, he'd just start singing a hymn.
Mm. Totally unrelated to anything going on at the moment.
Totally unrelated in the living
Wow.
room. And I think my dad almost did an eye roll.
I can imagine, being a sort of unwilling believer or unwilling participant in Mormonism, as it seems like your dad was. That would be really off-putting and kind of crazy, really borderline crazy. I even think, I'm thinking about my experiences with other people in the church. I can't imagine being in a setting where that was happening all the time and just sitting there not saying anything about it.
Yeah, I didn't say anything, but I can't imagine myself now as grown up Lori sitting there and listening to that.
Yeah,
I would have been like, you need some help. This isn't normal.
yeah.
Like,
I mean, I'm thinking about my own Mormon brain. Even now, sometimes, if something sparks it, a scripture will come to mind. If I'm in a certain situation, and I just remember like being a kid out, weeding the garden with my parents, and I would say, "Oh, I'm tired. I want to go inside," and my dad would say, "Put your shoulder to the wheel, push along," and start singing a hymn that way. That felt a little normal to me, but I can't imagine just doing it with no circumstances, no context around it.
I was going to make a comment about that song, but I don't want to bring it up. But I believe there's someone that had that song at their funeral, if I recollect. And I
Yes.
just think that is very out of pocket and just
Yeah.
a strange song to have. It makes more sense in the context of doing gardening, but
Right.
in any other way, I think it's a bizarre song.
It's a really odd choice. Tammy Daybell, her funeral was very hastily put together, and they sang "Put Your Shoulder to the Wheel," which Mormon funerals are strange anyway to anybody who's not Mormon, because it's very much about the doctrine and the plan of salvation, quote unquote, more than it is about honoring the person's life. And so that's already strange. But to be so disconnected from your grief that that's the song that you choose, that's just a whole separate level. And I think we don't need to go, to get into the psychology behind maybe why Chad might have wanted to distance himself from his grief, but that's a rabbit hole for a different time.
Yeah,
But
what?
yeah,
But
it's
okay.
yeah, it's a bizarre song, and it's one of those, I don't know, the recitation of scripture and the spontaneous singing of hymns. I'm wondering if he made it, or if he I wonder if he equated that with being more righteous or more holy, that he constantly had a hymn just at the ready.
He was very narcissistic, and he thought very highly of himself. Yeah, he really did. And I feel like people that do that do suffer from some kind of not only mental illness, but some type of hyper religiosity where they can't get it. They can't have a normal conversation either without introducing something about the church, someone in the church, like every other sentence. And for somebody that isn't, fond of it or believes in it, it's torture.
Yeah, definitely. I'm thinking about, this concept of hyper-religiosity, which is basically like religious OCD. And I think Mormonism is more prone to cause those types of symptoms in people because there's such a focus of always reciting a scripture, always having a hymn. I remember one of the general authorities gave a talk about, if you're tempted, you should just sing a hymn. And I know that there was a primary song called Hum Your Favorite Hymn, and it was basically that concept of like, if you're ever thinking bad thoughts or if you're feeling tempted, then you should sing a hymn. So I remember that being like a very pervasive part of what I learned growing up. And in addition to that, especially growing up in the mission field, quote unquote, every conversation was a missionary opportunity. And we were sort of taught to turn everything into that. And the whole concept of likening the scriptures to you, like instead of saying I Nephi, say I Megan. It just reminds me that Mormons really do try to turn every experience back into a spiritual experience that proves that what they believe is real.
I agree. And the other thing I was going to say along those lines is that it seems like to me a lot of people made up stories, I believe, about having visions inside of,
Right.
and I mean, across the board in the mission field, and especially in Southeast Idaho, people thought they were so cool. I believe this to my core, that they loved to stand up and tell about how they had a visitation from someone, or were in the temple and saw someone, or heard a voice, or this, that, and the other. I
Yeah.
mean, it was like they thought everyone was going to look at them like, wow, you're so spiritual. You're special because you had a vision, someone visited you, or you got a special message. Like, I felt like there was a lot of, straight up lying going on to get attention and to feel like they were important. And a lot of it, I feel like, is to hide the dirty laundry too. And with the person we were talking about, with the random singing and scriptures, if you think about it, people that sometimes do those things like to interrupt their thought process if they start thinking about anything they've done wrong. It's like that's their automatic interruption.
Right. It's a way to dissociate from the truth of what you've actually done or things that you're ashamed of, special visions and all of that. It's kind of hard to get away from that in Mormonism because the church is founded on some guy going out into the woods and seeing heavenly beings, just a normal 14-year-old kid. And so there's that foundational belief. And then there's also this idea that we're supposed to expect visions and signs and wonders, and the heavens aren't closed, and God still speaks to his prophets. Those ideas in Mormonism also, I think, lend themselves to people wanting to feel special and important. I mean, look at Joseph Smith. He had this vision and he became the prophet of this worldwide, huge organization. Obviously, wasn't worldwide when he was alive, but how much more special can you get than that? And so I really think that ideas of dreams and visions and, prophecy and revelation, it's what the foundation of Mormonism is. And so it really shouldn't be a surprise that people exaggerate or just flat out make up stories about their spiritual importance.
I agree. That makes so much sense. If someone started that and that was the whole beginning, everybody else is going to follow suit. And why do people need to feel important? Why do they need to feel like they need to lie sometimes and say all these things? If the church is so great and you're, feeling you're doing all the things, why do you need to come up as a visionary?
Yeah. I also think, though, we built into Mormonism is this culture where we outsource our personal worthiness to someone else. We don't declare ourselves worthy. We go to an interview to be declared worthy by someone in higher authority than us. And so there is like this idea that I have to chase my worthiness. Someone has to give it to me. And then there's also the spiritual progression idea of like the different levels of heaven, that you can get into. And so it's an environment of constant need for validation. It's like achievement-based validation, and it's all external validation rather than saying to myself, I don't have to do or be anything other than I am in order to be a worthy, valuable human being.
Yeah, there's always an interview. There's always an interview and going down the list. And, I lied on so many things on that list.
Yeah.
I just did.
So you mentioned the temple being a place that you did not like to go. And as long as we're talking about interviews, can you talk a little bit about what your experience was like as a youth and then, maybe later?
Yeah. So going as a youth, the first time was going Idaho Falls Temple, and it was baptisms for the dead. And I remember, the temple being very expensive looking and ornate. And I remember what looked like a big bull or a cow or something. And there was like almost like a font there. And I just remember it was almost like they pulled a name out of the hat, and it was like everybody had a similar name every time we went. It was like Anna Smith. Like it was just all these random names. And I just thought, well, that's weird. And then I asked one of the leaders that took us, because that's just me. I said, like, what if these people don't want to be baptized? If they really exist, like, how do we know we didn't get permission from them? They didn't take the lessons or anything. If they're not a member, how are we doing this without their permission? And boy, that was shut down really quick. No, everybody that's on that list, it's been spiritually, whatever somebody higher up says they do. Okay, so I didn't like doing that. I avoided going to the temple. I thought everyone in there was so quiet. And I just remember thinking, man, all these people are like 90, 100 years old, floating around in white clothes and white hair, and whispering. And it was just like, I think the cafeteria was good. That was about it. And and it wasn't free, but
Right.
but nothing was free. But yeah, I mean, eventually going to take out my endowments, which is such a weird word, endowment. I totally wasn't worthy of that in terms of the church and what they might think, because about that time I met a returned missionary. And because I hadn't gotten a lot of attention from the guys at school, I guess I wasn't the typical looking Idaho girl for them. I'm not sure what. He was a returned missionary, and that was like a good check mark. That would make the family happy. And
Acceptable.
Acceptable. He was very persuasive and put a lot of pressure on me to be intimate.
So he was manipulative, predatory.
Yes, predatory. And that was fine, because guess what? I was used to that. And was anyone else any different? So I fit the mold. I was like, oh, this is what you do, but I'll have to marry him now. I'll have no choice, because look at what we've done.
Right.
Off to the temple. But we shouldn't, in the church's eyes, we shouldn't have been going. We weren't worthy. We'd been doing all the things. And they used to say this word in Idaho when somebody really wasn't into the church, but they went and didn't do some of the stuff. They called them Jack Mormons.
Yeah.
Because, behind the church's back, you could smell the alcohol on them, and they were just kind of like doing all the things, and
pretending.
It never bothered me, actually.
So how old were you when you met your return missionary?
I was 17. I barely turned 17 years old. I was a senior in high school, because I was on the younger side when I started school. And so I was just barely 17. My choir teacher had abruptly married his dad. And
Wow.
he called me on the phone and said, "Would you like to go on a blind date?" And that was very random. And she said, "Actually, it's with my husband's son. He just got back from a mission." And so we met and started dating.
Wow.
And my parents couldn't stand him. My dad said he was poor and wouldn't be able to take care of me.
Mm.
Um, his family wasn't active in the church. And he was older than me. He was 4 years older than me on top
Yeah.
of it. Um, but anyway, I told them we were engaged over the phone. I was 18. I had turned 18. And I was going to Ricks College, which is now BYU, Idaho.
Hmm.
And yeah, they weren't happy about it, but they had to go along with it. It was awful. It was the worst wedding experience ever. Anyone
Mm.
gotten married in the Mormon temple, I think, could testify to this. There's no walking down the aisle with a bouquet of flowers, with a
Right.
violin playing and all your friends and family. You're in
Right.
there alone with these people floating around in white clothes. You know, you've got these strange garments you're wearing, and you all go into the room, and only the people that made it and passed the test and had the interview and passed and had the golden ticket would be able to come
Right.
in and be with you.
Right.
And it was just unemotional for me. I remember not really being excited about it.
Mm.
And I remember a whole bunch of people standing outside that couldn't come in.
Wow.
And that was sad, I thought.
Yeah. So here again, I'm coming back to the adults in your life, and your parents clearly did not like this guy. You said they couldn't stand him. You know, your dad was worried he wouldn't be able to provide for you. So I'm just, again, sad that nobody stepped in and had a conversation with this young man and said, look, I don't think that you're the right person for my daughter, you know, or at least had a conversation with you and said, look, even if you guys went too far, you're not stuck with him. You don't have to be with him if you don't love him, you know?
Yeah, because I definitely wouldn't have the courage to start the conversation and the dialogue,
Yeah.
you know, at that point. But I
Yeah.
wish that would have happened. It would have changed the trajectory of my life, you
Yeah.
know, because I think, you know, we were married not even a year, and a letter came in the mail and said he may be the father of a child in Utah.
Wow.
And it was on our first anniversary that the
Wow.
results came and said that he was.
Wow.
So then he had to pay all this back child support, and guess who had to pay it?
Oh, was it your dad? Wow.
And it was a big chunk of change. And I knew
Mm.
he must have been fuming.
Wow.
So he was a predator. He
So this
was.
happened while he was on his mission?
It happened before he went on his mission. This gal had said she was expecting and the baby was his. He said, "Let's do a DNA test." The bishop said, "Do that. And based on the result, we'll decide." And she didn't show up.
Okay.
And so the bishop said, "If she didn't show up, then you can go on your mission. You're free of
Wow.
the situation. So go ahead and go." So he went ahead and went. And yeah, he did some fun things on his mission, I found out later.
So once again, I'm just thinking, I knew so many people who were prevented from going on their missions, or they had to wait several months before they went because they had some transgression that they had to go through the repentance process first. And yet here this guy just got a free pass and was like, oh, well, the girl's not here to hold you accountable. So if, you know, where are thine accusers? You know, if nobody's here, go ahead and go on your mission. And I it's such a harmful culture, it's like this bro circle of like giving the men each other a pass, and then most of the time it's the woman who has to be the one to suffer for it, because if you're pregnant out of wedlock in Mormonism, then you have all of this social consequence for the girl, but for the man there just isn't the same level of accountability or consequence. And it just seems like so many times they let predators just go on with their lives because it's easier than disrupting the family.
I agree with that. And again, the sweeping everything under the carpet, it's a great way for people to learn how to do that. And
Right.
I did not ever have a conversation with him about what had happened to me in my childhood or anything, to be fair.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it wouldn't have changed a thing, because the stuff he revealed to me that had happened, where he was the predator, he should have revealed to me before we ever got engaged. And so that
Right.
was not cool. Um,
Right.
and at that moment, we were already married, and I just had to kind of go with it, because you can't get married in the temple and then have a divorce, heaven forbid.
Yeah.
But eventually that did happen. When that happened, it was my decision.
Mm.
It was my decision. And I remember he came into the house after we were divorced. He had a key or got in somehow, and he had been drinking. And I remember he had essayed me. We were divorced, and I was going to the hospital to do a kit,
Mm.
and I was going to hold him responsible for that. I
Yeah.
finally had felt like, I'm going to do this. And as soon as I was walking into the hospital, a car pulled up. These guys got out of the car. One of them was the bishop, the other one was his dad. And they said, don't go in there and do the kit. It's going to ruin his life. He's going to lose his job. He's going to this, he's going to that. Please don't do it. He's going to have legal charges, all this stuff, putting all of the blame on me. Like, if I were to do this and protect myself and have any kind of justice, yeah, no, look out for him. It's all about him. It was never, hey, are you okay?
Yeah. What about you, and what about your life and your future and your job and your mental health and your experience? It's like
Yeah,
it doesn't matter because he's a priesthood holder, and you holding him accountable would quote unquote ruin him. Not that he ruined himself by doing this to you.
yeah. I actually called the police, and they came to the house, and that's what they suggested I do. And they told him to leave. And I headed right up to Madison Memorial Hospital in Rexburg. After that, the turn of events after that were something else.
So
And
were you able to go in and get the kit done?
no, I was scared to death.
Yeah.
They were scaring me. They were talking me down from my ledge, so to speak.
Wow.
And after that, I really had a lot of depression and anxiety, and had a really hard time. I was the type of person that wanted 3 locks on the door. If Ring cameras would have existed, I probably would have had one of those. I would have had all kinds of things. I couldn't even marry somebody that could have been a decent human being. You know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
like, what is this? What is this life? And, just fast, I wanted out. I wanted out of that church. I wanted out of the responsibility of all of it. And
Yeah.
I got to a point where I just didn't care. I just didn't give a flying F.
Yeah.
And if my mom hadn't have passed away, sadly, I think I'd still be, uh, until the day, if she would have continued, nothing happened and life went on, I probably would have gone through the motions. and through going to church and being a member.
Yeah.
So I felt guilty because I felt like maybe she had died prematurely because so that I could do that. That was my thought process, which is not normal. That wouldn't have been it.
Right.
But it's a thing that goes through your head.
Yeah.
Like did this happen to my mom so I could be set free?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so sad to me every time that I hear a story like yours. And it's similar to my story too, where we think about everybody else but ourselves. You know, we make sure everybody else feels comfortable and safe before we make ourselves safe.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like after that I was ostracized. I mean, at funerals, like the siblings, like nobody would even talk to me. Weddings, I would be afraid to attend the reception. You know, it was like a temple wedding and I couldn't go, of course. I had no temple recommend. And to go to the reception and have not one family member address that you're there and come over and say hi.
Yeah.
It was like that. And then I just stopped. I just stopped trying to, yeah.
There's just an inherent mistrust of family members who are now non-members. There's an inherent mistrust of non-members. It's so interesting because if you have friends who are non-members and you've never talked to them about the gospel, it's like you want to inundate them with gospel conversations and love bombing and inviting them to every activity. But once somebody leaves the church, there's an inherent mistrust of that individual. And there is no effort really to reclaim you in a healthy way because it's like we just don't trust you and we don't want to talk to you. And I think a big part of it is because when we leave, we hold up a mirror for those who stay, and they don't like what they see in that mirror. They don't like the fact that somebody left, somebody stopped gaslighting themselves into believing, you know, somebody actually took the items off the shelf and examined them and said, nope, no, thank you. And they have to sit with their own cognitive dissonance about why they stay when someone leaves. And it's so hard for them to confront that they'd rather just not talk to you at all because they don't want to know. They're afraid. Don't tell me why you left because it might shake my faith too.
Well, and I also think on that note, if you keep in the Mormon culture, I know they like to say Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but that's too much for me to say. I'm sorry.
It is for me too.
Yeah, Mormons are Mormons. So
right.
I think they like to keep, my philosophy is they like to keep people quite busy. So you've got it used to be 3-hour church. Maybe it's 2 hours now. If you're in the choir, you come back later for rehearsal. If you've got a calling, maybe you have a meeting later. Then the next night is family home evening. Let's play Twister and make some popcorn and read a scripture and someone give a talk. Oh my gosh. And then you've got, visiting teaching and home teaching and seminary. And then it's like one thing after another. You don't have time for the outside world to interfere with your thought process and your beliefs as a Mormon. And they look at it that way.
Yes. I believe that it is a marker of high control groups that they keep you busy. They keep you too busy to think for yourself. And, your whole life is consumed with doing things for building up the kingdom of God is what they call it, But if it's, if you've got a spare moment where you're not doing any of those things, what are you supposed to be doing? Reading your scriptures, listening to conference talks, talking to someone about the gospel, writing in your journal, doing family history work. There's a never-ending list. You don't get downtime as a Mormon.
Keep people busy so that they won't have a minute to stop and think about, all these things, and it's frowned upon to have friends that don't go to church.
Right.
And if you do, you better be bringing them to church and trying to convert them.
Right. I remember so many times people getting up on open mic Sunday on fast and testimony meeting and getting ready to tell a story about a friend of theirs. And they would always qualify it by saying, so I was talking with a friend the other day they're not a member, but they're still a really good person. You know, did you ever have experiences like that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's bizarre. It happened all the time. My parents were collecting non-members and seeing if they could convert them by living in our house. And that was a problem too. I will say at one point, going back to Massachusetts, and in regards to trying to get people to join, my parents decided to take on some foster girls that were teenagers. And I was younger at the time. And these girls
Wow.
came in and they were living wild lives. They were smoking, they were drinking, they were doing all the things with the guys. And my parents brought them in and foster family that was going to convert them to the church and make them be modest and, you know, no smoking allowed, and you're going to go to church with us on Sunday, and that's the way it's going to be. Well, they went ahead and complied because they had, you know, no choice in front of them, but behind their backs, you know, when they left the building, they pretty much did their thing. But to get revenge on my parents, that was important to them. And that's the problem when you start pushing non-members. And who
Right.
better than to use to hurt them the most would be to abuse their young daughter.
Mm.
So they did that. They wanted to teach me all kinds of bad, foul language, which I'd never heard,
Yeah. Yeah.
and all kinds of other things that were inappropriate. And you can just imagine. So they were no different than the people that were going to church. But they were doing that because they were angry at my parents. And I know that looking back, that had to have been it. It's if you have a friend, you should be setting an example and helping them join. Always being a missionary. Your whole life is a mission and going to be and being a missionary every day of your life.
Right. And there's also sort of this Mormon savior complex that, you know, Mormons really do believe they have the one true faith, and that they believe that it's their obligation to share it with every single person they come into contact with. And, you know, I know more than one Mormon family who adopted children just for the express reason that they knew they were saving that kid and bringing them into the true faith.
That's so interesting because, yeah, I mean, being adopted myself, and then later on in life, meeting my actual biological mother, when she found out I was Mormon, she was horrified.
Mm.
She said she would have never, ever, you know, she didn't get to pick the family, but
Right.
had she have dreamt of where I was, she knew all about that religion, and she didn't feel good about it. So it's not the luck of the draw, but I'd say that, you know, having older parents and them having grandchildren growing up about the same time, their headspace, you know, between church and all of that, I think they just didn't, they were just looking the other way sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I I know so many kids who were not quote unquote abused as kids, but because their parents weren't engaged enough, that neglect really is abusive.
Yeah.
And, you know, the parents being so wrapped up in their own problems or their own issues or what's going on with them. And there again, you know, just the idea of, I think it's wonderful when people want to be foster parents, but I think that above that desire to help other children needs to be the desire that what's best for my children, you know,
Absolutely.
and bringing kids into the home who have an unknown mental health history and things like that, I think is, you know, where's the consideration for your biological children or for the children who already exist in your home, you know?
Well, it's unfortunate because, you know, I realize at those girls' age that I think the idea is when they weren't home, they would be babysitters too.
Yep. 100%.
And I hate to say that, but
Yeah.
they were the most dangerous kind of babysitters because
Yeah.
you unleash the fire in them when you force them to go to church and all that business.
Right.
Or an
And with the parents out of the house, and they're in charge. Yeah, when the cat's away, the mice will
Every-
play.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was like that. But I think, for me, once I decided not to go to church, I remember sitting up in the room. This was my parents' house, by the way. I had the door locked and I was in there, actually had a computer. I had a pack of cigarettes. I decided to smoke. I don't smoke now. That was a long time ago. But I smoked. And I remember somebody coming in the house because you don't need to lock your door in Rigby, Idaho. And somebody came up to the house and knocked on that door and said, "Lori, are you in there?" And I recognized the voice. It was from someone from church. They said, "Are you smoking in there? Lori, is that you in there? Are you smoking in there?" And I didn't say one word. And they left. And then I went downstairs and locked the door and thought, from now on, I'll lock the door. But I
Right.
thought, what are you doing here? It's none of your business that now I've decided to occasionally have a mojito and that I'm trying out coffee and tea and I want to see what a cigarette is like. And I want
Yeah.
to wear different clothes and, oh, I want to go tattoo myself up. And I sure did. And I want a piercing in my nose. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do all the things.
Yeah.
And that's how that came out because I wanted control.
Right.
And the
Yeah.
tattoos were control over my body.
Mm-hmm. There is also in Mormonism, especially I think in these tight-knit communities, an element of policing each other and informing on each other. And I can't tell you how many times that I found out that somebody had told a priesthood leader something about me. And sure enough, then I was having a conversation in the bishop's office about it. People don't talk to each other, they talk about each other and they inform on each other because it's sort of this weird social dynamic of like, if I point out something that somebody else is doing wrong, then nobody's going to look at me.
Take the attention off of yourself, put it on someone else. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be moments, though, when there's reflection. And I don't know how it swiped away so quickly, but yeah. I mean, when my family saw me with all my tattoos with short sleeves on, I thought they were just going to lose. I just thought they looked like they were going to faint. It was a Thanksgiving dinner I was invited to, and I walked in there with a nose ring and all these piercings. And it was just like, I was a heathen, you know, I was, doing satanic rituals or
Right.
something. I'd become a true witch or, something. I don't know. But nobody talked to me after that. Not a soul.
Yeah.
Things were happening and I never knew things happened and that was it. That was all she wrote. But I wanted to try all the things, man. Nothing was going to stop me. And no, I didn't keep smoking. Did I like the taste of alcohol? Not really. I didn't know how to drink. Most Mormons don't.
Right.
You drink and you think it doesn't work and you drink yourself silly until you stand up and realize you've overdone it with your
Yeah.
head in the toilet. But, I'll have a mojito once in a while. I don't have a cigarette, but, you know, I drink coffee every day. Um, Back, before got married again, I had no problem with premarital relationships or living together.
Yeah.
I wanted to know what people were about. Yeah. And I'm about the most unjudgmental person you could come across, in my own opinion. I don't judge a book by their cover. And if somebody tells me all of their deepest, darkest secrets and sins, if you want to call them that even, um, it doesn't change my opinion about them.
Yeah. And in Mormonism, that's not really how it goes most of the time. It's not really safe for you to share your real feelings, your real thoughts, your real mistakes. I found this to be true, that it was only okay for us to talk about mistakes if they were past mistakes. Like
Yeah.
if we had already repented and it wasn't a problem anymore. But it was never okay to get up on open mic Sunday and say, I'm really struggling with alcohol. I want to drink. I enjoy drinking. That's just not a thing anybody would ever do because of the judgment and the shame. I mean, can you imagine what the reaction from the ward members would be if somebody did that?
I'm just kind of laughing because, like, I just picture it in my mind, and some people being like, "Clutch your pearls," like, oh
Right.
my gosh. But I do remember people getting a hold of that microphone and standing up in the pew. They passed the microphone around, and some of those people, man, they got on the soapbox and they didn't want to give that microphone back, and the bishop would have to like somehow get it away from them because they just wanted to
Yep.
talk about their grocery shopping list and you name it.
How they were inspired to buy this can of tomatoes instead of that one, and it ended up being on sale.
Yeah, I mean, it's bizarre. I
Yeah.
don't, and even in any other church, I don't know that they actually have their own broadcasting system and have a general conference, and they actually have a living prophet. The Catholic Church has a pope, but we have prophets that are, pretty elderly, and they seem like sweet, innocent men, but they definitely lay the law down. They're not oblivious. And
Yes. And they also haven't revealed anything since basically 1978. I mean, they say that the family proclamation was a revelation. They try to make this distinction between revelation and policy. And so if you really believe what they say, all of the new policies that they've implemented lately, none of that's revelation, it's just policy. So yeah, they have a living prophet who doesn't prophesy anything.
the other day I was answering a family member who said, well, how's work going? And I said, it's kind of slow, since COVID. And they said, do you pay your tithing? I said, no. And they said, if you paid your tithing, things would be better for you, Lori, and you would be making more money.
Yeah.
That's not true. That is not true.
No, it's a typical narrative. And again, it's that mirror that you're holding up to them. And they're saying, I'm paying my tithing and I'm hoping those blessings are going to come true. So I'm going to make other people do that because that makes me feel safer too. And I know that there is a narrative out there that when you leave the church, the light leaves your eyes, your countenance becomes darker. And people in the church love to point at people who have left the church and say, see, if you had stayed in the church, that never would have happened to you. And I used this example of when I was, laid off from my job, or my job was eliminated. And if I had been in the church, people would have said, oh, give me your resume. Let me make some connections for you. Can we help? Do you need to go do a food order at the storehouse? Like, how can we support you? And when you've left the church, the answer is, well, see, you left the church. That never would have happened. You never would have lost your job if you would have stayed faithful.
Yeah, and actually the church, from my understanding, is that if you're in a hard place financially and you've invested all of this tithes, your family has, all of this, if you run across hard times and would go to the church, they would tell you to go to family first. This is what I understand. And then if family couldn't help you, you'd go to the government.
Right.
Then if the government couldn't help you, you would go to the church. And then finally, they would be your last resort. Yet I find that weird because you are putting yourself first on my paycheck, and you want me to pay 10% of tithes to you. Yet you're saying you're the last people I should ask for help. Then I want a refund.
Right.
Of everything.
Right. Right.
A
And
refund,
I definitely felt that way when I left the church. I thought about all the time that I donated when, my friends who were musicians were getting paid hundreds and sometimes thousands of dollars a month to do church jobs. And here I was giving that to the church for free and paying my tithing. and teaching and doing all these other callings for the church. And I really could have used that money. And when I left, I wanted it back because I felt like I'd been defrauded. I was like, this is fraud. You lied to me. I want my money back.
I also feel like I just want to say this, and I mean it for anyone listening. I believe that the church is a cult. I really do. It's an MLM. It's sending young boys and young women out to strange countries and walking around, knocking on doors. Very dangerous in some situations. Not even paying for it. You're asking them or their family to pay for it and sacrifice. And if they can't, the ward at the last resort will do it, which I find pathetic. Because you're asking them to work for free.
Right.
And they're basically trying to get people, and they're saying, well, how many investigators do you have right now? How many ready for baptism? And it's kind of like working for a company in sales. And they say, what are your sales goals? Like, have you met them this month? What is it looking like? And this is what you need to do. And it's like when you say, yeah, we've got a baptism set up, they're like, yes. Because why? The person's going to get blessings, and they're going to go through the temple and have a celestial lifetime, and family's going to be forever together and whatever else. And we get the 10%. The bottom line is we get another 10%. And what are we going to do with it? Are we going to give it to the church? No. What are we going to do with it? We're going to build another what?
Temple.
There you go.
Yeah.
So for me, I don't like that. And I thought everyone's being bamboozled. And I just think it's crazy to me. But here, they track you down where I live here, because this is the mission field, Maryland. And they tracked me down and came knocking at the door, and even the Relief Society, they get your phone number and call you. And she wanted to invite me out for lunch, and I knew what that meant. I took her up on the offer, not because I wanted to have lunch with her, but I couldn't wait for her to pretend it was a friendly lunch and then start talking about church and coming to church. I went fully prepared, fully loaded. And I got there and we're having lunch. Everything's going great. And she's like, well, I really want to share my testimony about the church and about attending and coming back. It will be so great and bless your family and on and on. And I said, you know what? If you've been SA'd at church over and over and over again at the church house, would you want to go to church? And she just stood there. She just sat there with her eyes open, her jaw dropped, and she didn't know what to say. She goes, oh, I'm really sorry that happened, but you can be healed and come back to church, and you can talk to the bishop, and, you can work those things out. And I just looked at her and I thought, wow, if you believe that, you know nothing. So I put that down, and nobody called me again or texted me again, because she told the bishop, guess what she said?
Yeah.
Better not send anybody over there.
No, because you would crack their shelf if you told them what actually happened to you. And I find it unfortunately not surprising, that when somebody experiences something truly traumatic, the answer is take it to Jesus. Jesus will take away your pain, and then go talk to the bishop. And I'm like, I've had too many experiences with too many bishops who are completely untrained to handle anything close to anything mental health related, and especially not traumatic circumstances. And that's the last person that you should go and talk to, because he doesn't have any special power or discernment to know what to tell you that you need to do to heal. You know who does know that? You do. And I do. I know exactly what I need to do to heal. And I think for me, that's the most valuable thing that I developed coming out of Mormonism is faith in my own intuition.
And that's amazing. And I hold you in high regard for that. And coming to that realization, it takes a lot of work. It
Yeah.
takes a lot of work coming out of these situations and being able to help your own self and
Yeah.
realizing, I mean, it's an amazing thing to accomplish. And yeah, self-love, self-healing, and
Yeah.
drawing lines in the sand with people,
Yeah.
and being able to have the opportunity to talk to you and be able to talk about these things, and knowing that people are going to hear this. If it even helps one person to know they're not alone, then for me, that's great.
Yeah.
Because I know there's more people that are going through things that'll never speak up, and
Yeah.
because of family, friends, church, fear of losing people, fear of being alone and being judged.
Yeah.
Very, very sad and tragic. Um, it really is. And back to Mormon funerals, because I forgot something I wanted to say on that.
Yeah.
I really dislike the way, for mental health purposes, that is also handled, because they almost try to push sadness and grieving away
Yes.
and don't allow people to sit in their grief and have and cry and grieve
Yeah.
loss of a parent or a child or a family or friend. There's
Mm-hmm.
no reason to grieve, because you're going to see them again. They're going to be waiting for you. They're in a good place. They're with, their other family members, and they want to sweep it under the carpet and just move on.
Yeah.
And that's how my family was. And that's not how I handled things. I did
Yeah.
not want them to close my mother's casket. I stood there until finally somebody had to come and drag me away,
Mm.
because they weren't going to allow me to do it and have that
Yeah.
moment. And I didn't want to let it go. I
Yeah.
want to not see her face again, because at that point, I really didn't know if I would.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say the word hate. I detest that about the church, that
Yeah.
they don't allow people to grieve properly.
Yeah. I agree with you. It sounds though like we were talking about learning to trust yourself again. It sounds like that you're doing that. It sounds like you're establishing those boundaries, and it sounds like you know what you need and what you want. And I love the story of you, sitting down with that Relief Society president and telling them the truth about your experience and saying no thank you.
Yeah, because these unannounced visits from the elders knocking on the door, or sisters, or text messages, were so annoying to me.
Mhm.
And I got to the point where, and her continual invitations, I got to the point where I was like, I'm going to have to shut this down.
Yeah.
I got angry enough that I accepted the invitation, and I thought, she doesn't know what she's walking into. And
Yeah.
it's not that she had done anything personally to me.
Right.
I don't know her journey, but I was going to shut it down, and it did. Not a peep out of anybody again. But to furthermore shut it down, I found out and studied and researched how to remove my name from the records of the church. Now, part of me said, what does it matter? Because all of it's fake anyway. And
Yeah.
in the end, it truly doesn't matter, right? But I thought, it'll feel good. It's a part of my healing process.
Yeah.
I want to see an official letter that says that. So I had to write to the bishop, and I had to give him this formal request. I followed all the rules written in front of me and wrote the request, and it felt so good. And I wrote it, emailed it, and his answer was, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Let me talk to the stake president and see how this should be handled." Then he got back to me and said, "Okay, I'm going to send this to the headquarters of the church." He said, "But I want to let you know before I send it that by doing this, and if this is granted, you will lose all of the privileges you ever had in the Mormon church. You will lose the ability to enter the celestial kingdom where God and Christ dwell and to be with your family forever. You will lose all of those blessings of the Holy Ghost and your baptism and your everything. I just want to let you know that and make sure you know that." And I said, "Okay." That's all I said back. I just put, "Okay," explanation point. And so I'm waiting the mailbox. I'm awaiting the letter that says I'm officially. And he said, also, by the way, I can also make it so that your name and your phone number and email is not in the ward directory or, anywhere where people will come and bother you. I said, "Yes, please."
Yeah, as it should be. If you remove your name from the records of the church, you should not be on the roll anymore where people can contact you. And that's part of the reason why a lot of people do it. I also want to say, for those of you who are watching, if anybody's in the same situation and you want to remove your name, but you don't want to go through having to talk to the bishop and all of that, you can go to quitmormon.org and you can fill out a form, have it notarized, which you can have it notarized at any post office or any bank, and you just mail it in, and then they mail you a letter back, and there is no communication with your bishop whatsoever. You don't have to go through that part of the process where they re-traumatize you and they try to hoover you back in. And if somebody had said to me, "You're going to lose all the privileges you had in this church," I would have said, "Excuse me, what privilege? The privilege to be assaulted, the privilege to be demeaned, the privilege to come second and third after everybody who's been through the temple and all of the men, the privilege to be silenced, the privilege to be shamed. Sorry, no
No,
thank you."
exactly. And it's funny, I didn't have mine notarized and they never said anything about that. But I believe that's the website or one of them like that I
Yeah.
used where it gave the proper wording. In fact, it
Mm-hmm.
said something like you needed to say you were resigning from
Mm-hmm.
some kind of
Right.
wording like that. But I
Yeah.
did it properly. And so I'm awaiting that. And I think it gives closure. I
Yeah.
think for anyone out there listening, it can give you closure somehow to detach
Yeah.
yourself officially,
Right.
and I also feel like it should also, not that I believe that the temple marriage would go on, but I would think if my name's not on the record and I'm not officially Mormon anymore, then the temple marriage, I think, would be void.
Yes, I believe that's true.
Even though, there's the divorce and then there's the temple divorce. Yeah.
Right. Right. And it used to be that you had to write a letter to the first presidency to get your sealing canceled. But I think if you remove your name from the records, it's kind of like you were saying, it's all made up anyway. So it doesn't really matter, but there is something cognitive about doing the official thing in their eyes so that they know. And for me, removing my name from the records was more about I did not want them to continue to use me as a statistic anymore. Because if you don't remove your name, they keep your name on the records until you're 110 years old or until you die, until they know that you've died. And I did not want to be used anymore by the church. And that's why I took my name off.
Good for you. And you know what? Um, I got so many emails when I left the church from family members, like sister-in-laws, especially, saying your mom would be ashamed of you. You don't deserve that last name. Your mom will be ashamed of you. And then they would call and scream at me. And just even the daughter of the hyper religiosity uncle that used to sing and recite scripture, his daughter, who was not a member and a estranged member anyway, she called and screamed at me and said, your mom would be ashamed as well, and blah blah blah. And I remember I cried so hard that I had to get into a cold bath water that was cold. My migraine was so bad it sent me to the emergency room.
Wow.
And I remember I had a little mental break, and I ended up in a place in Idaho Falls called Behavioral Health Center. The hospital sent me there, and I was there for about a week, and they gave me antidepressants, stuff for anti-anxiety. They had a little bit of a counseling situation. But what really was the icing on the cake was a family member called because they found out I was there, and they lied about being a doctor, talked to the doctor there, and literally the person was a PhD, but they're not a medical doctor.
Right.
And they said, yes, so-and-so's there, and I'd like to know her diagnosis and what you're saying about her. And they went right ahead. I know there was a drop of the church name, the church title. I'm a member. And they said, yes, she's suffering from extended bereavement from the passing of her mother. She didn't properly grieve, and she can't stop grieving. And your family members are sending her emails and calling her and guilt tripping her and driving her crazy. So she's here to try to get her anxiety together and her depression together and to be able to function. And it's really hard to talk about that and to mention that, because nobody wants to admit that they had to be admitted to somewhere like that.
Yeah.
But it's not even just that. It's these people are Mormon, and they're driving me into a behavioral health clinic.
Yeah. And it's so unnecessary. Like, there's the stunning lack of awareness of what that's going to do to somebody. And they think that they're doing the right thing by trying to, shame you into coming back to church by saying your mom would be disappointed. And so you're like, yeah, she would be disappointed. So I'm going to come back to the place where I was abused over and over. I just don't understand why there is no hate like Mormon love. I don't understand why Mormons feel like they have to try and guilt trip us and shame us. And like we're somehow just going to go, oh, you're right. Yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy to me. I wouldn't be able to cope, honestly, with having someone around me, a close friend, a family member. I can't really cope with it. I had a birthday last year and was invited by a nephew to meet for lunch. We were quite close growing up. He was about my age. I'll never forget it. I hoped his wife wouldn't be there. She's really religious, really staunch Mormon, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
And here he showed up and she was with him. And I thought, here we go. We sat down to eat and she started in with me on my birthday, talking about tithing, asking me if I'm going to church, asking me how the kids are, if they're going to seminary, if I'm going to church, if they are, if not, why. She didn't want to know anything else about me, only church related things.
Right.
I got about 2 bites of my food, and I knew my nephew couldn't take it anymore. He could see what was happening, and he said, well, I've got to get back to work and to my meeting. And that was such a relief. I took my box to go. I got in the car and cried for a good 30 minutes. And then I went home. And I thought, never again, never again. So, unfortunately, just like any church, there's good and bad humans, right? In the
Right.
world, good and bad humans. I
Right.
know this, you know.
Right.
It doesn't pass me by, but I have a deep problem with Mormons and their beliefs and what they want out of me to be their friend or their
Yeah.
family member.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing about going to a facility, a mental health facility, because so many of us need that and are ashamed to do it. And, I went through an outpatient treatment situation, which ended up saving my life. It was so necessary. And it's perfectly understandable that given everything that you've been through and everything that people in your own family were putting you through, that you needed to be in a facility. It's perfectly understandable. So many of us go through a faith crisis, or we go through traumatic situations and we think it's not that bad, I'll be all right. Or we think, oh, it's not as bad as so and so. But the bottom line is, trauma is trauma. It affects us all the same way. It's not the trauma Olympics if you think your trauma is not as bad as someone else's, because it affects you in the same way and you need the same kind of healing. And I really am grateful to have this opportunity to normalize the fact that going through a faith crisis and losing people you love and being abused by people you love is traumatic. And it does require really, really detailed care in the mental health arena. And I'm so glad that you got what you needed.
I mean, when I got to the hospital, I had made a phone call to a friend that wasn't Mormon, and that migraine had set me off, and I didn't want to be here anymore.
Yeah.
And I got to the hospital and I told them that, and
Yeah.
then told them that I said that, and that was an immediate, emergency, and
Right.
that's where they sent me.
Yeah.
And that's the only time in my life I've ever felt that way. I didn't
Yeah.
marry someone this time that was Mormon. That would have never happened,
Yeah.
and I don't have friends that are Mormon. Um, I I have, a cousin that is more like my mom, not pushy, and just a really nice woman, and we can have normal conversations. And
Yeah.
she's very non-judgmental. So when I say I can't have friends that are Mormon, I can't have extreme people that are on that path. that
Right.
that won't work. You know, we would break
Yeah.
up very quickly. We would break up very quickly. It would be very short lived. But I did everything against what the church said. They, back in the day, they said, don't marry out of your race. Blacks shouldn't come to church. They shouldn't go to the temple, blah, blah, blah. And that's exactly what I did because I could and I
Yeah.
wanted to.
Yeah.
And then they even say now, you can, but we don't recommend it.
Right. Right. So, Lori, now that you're out of the church, you're awaiting your resignation letter, the confirmation of it. I'm just curious about what are the things that you love about your life now that you couldn't have had before?
Well, the church talks about free agency. I never felt that until now. I have
Mm,
free agency now. I have free
yeah.
agency. The word free agency is what I'm living. If I go to dinner and want a mojito, I'll have it. If I
Yeah.
want to wear a shirt that shows my cleavage, I will. If I want
Yeah.
to pierce my ear 4 more times, I will. I
Yeah.
enjoy I enjoy being around people that, occasionally are driving and, drop a swear word or two, and they're human. I enjoy
Yeah.
my children, and I enjoy um, the diversity of this area, and the fact that my kids can talk to me about stuff and
Yeah.
about real life stuff going on. And my daughter saying something like, I really need a day of the week where I can decompress. School's a lot for me. I need a day of the week
Yeah.
can you arrange that for me with a counselor? Or,
Mm,
different thoughts like that. Having open conversations about anxiety, depression, happiness, knowing they're not in the Mormon church,
yeah,
that they'll make those choices when they get older, if they even want to.
yeah,
Being married to somebody who isn't someone who violates me and holds
mm,
me in high esteem and respects me and sees
yeah,
me for who I am. It's hard for him to listen to me tell about these things when I ever
yeah,
feel like I need to. It's too much
yeah,
and it's unfathomable to him. But I enjoy my work. I enjoy my makeup artistry and hair artistry and meeting all these different women, making them feel good and accepting
yeah,
them for who they are. And sometimes almost being a friend on their wedding day that is supportive, um, making friends with some, seeing people have real weddings where they
mm,
moment and they plan it and it's exactly the way they want it, whether it's
yeah,
in the backyard or at a venue or the courthouse. Having
yeah,
them, seeing people live their free lives, and not having to go to church on Sunday and being able to go to the movie theater if we want to, and just the freedom of being adult Lori, and nobody pushes me around.
yeah,
I'm still a kind person. I think I know I took a lot of my mom's traits and some of my dad's too, where I call BS when I see it, you know?
yeah,
And yeah, I'm just really grateful to be in a place where I even had the courage to even open a YouTube channel and say, this is my truth. This is who I am. And
yeah,
does anyone care? If you do, say something. But I've had
yeah,
haters come in there. Some Mormons float in and out, and,
yeah.
and that's okay. I actually find it comical now. At first, I was like, whoa, it was jarring. And now I'm just,
Yeah,
oh, this is kind of fun. Ooh. And I just say, hey, if you're going to be here, please subscribe.
yes. So everyone should go subscribe. Lori's channel is Chats with Lori. I'm a subscriber. And so make sure that you go over there and visit her channel, watch her videos, support her. And Lori, thank you so much for telling your story. It's a terrible story, but it's also a beautiful story. And what I love the most is hearing about all of the things in your life that you love now. And it sounds like you have a beautiful life.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And again, thank you for taking the time. And I enjoy following you and being a member of your channel as well, so I don't miss anything. And sometimes
Thank
I
you.
don't say anything. I'm just watching along, but
Yeah.
I really appreciate you and I admire you and I admire the way that you've handled your family situations that you've had to deal with over these years, and how much grace and how much dignity and class, and you've stayed true to yourself. And a lot of people need that. And I really am somebody that looks up to you for that. So thank you for that.
Thank you. That's very kind. Well, again, just everybody go and subscribe to Lori's channel. And thank you for being here today. Thank you for treating Lori's story with care. And please take care of yourself first.
Absolutely. I'm sending you a big hug, Megan.
Thank you. You
I hope,
too.
I hope you can feel it.
I do.